The easiest person to disrespect is often the one who knows exactly who they are. Monday mornings inside the Westbrook Police Department always carried the same rhythm: the buzz of radios, the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the front lobby, and the echo of polished boots crossing spotless tile floors. Officers hurried through security doors with clipboards tucked beneath their arms while dispatchers answered calls with calm precision. Hidden beneath that routine, however, was an unspoken hierarchy, one that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with assumptions. Officer Ethan Brooks walked through the lobby with the confidence of someone who believed the building belonged to him. His pressed uniform, polished badge, and effortless grin drew nods from younger officers eager to earn his approval. Ethan enjoyed attention, especially when it came at someone else's expense. That morning his eyes settled on a quiet man pushing a yellow janitor's cart across the hallway. Marcus Ellison wore simple navy work clothes with a maintenance badge clipped neatly to his chest. Gray streaks lined the edges of his short hair, and his calm expression never seemed to change. He moved carefully, making sure every corner of the lobby reflected the pride he took in his work. Without warning, Ethan stopped directly in Marcus's path and casually nudged a plastic bucket with the side of his boot. The bucket tipped onto its side, sending a wave of clean water across the polished floor. Several nearby officers glanced over. Ethan folded his arms with a smirk. "Looks like you've got yourself more work," he said loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. A few chuckles drifted through the room. Marcus looked down at the spreading water, then quietly reached for the mop without showing the slightest trace of frustration. His steady hands moved with practiced patience as if moments like this were nothing new. Ethan wasn't finished. "You missed a spot," he joked, pointing toward an already spotless section of tile. Another laugh rippled across the lobby. A rookie officer forced a smile, unsure whether joining the laughter was expected. Marcus simply nodded once and continued working. There was something unusual about the silence surrounding him. He didn't shrink. He didn't argue. He didn't hurry. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed strangely out of place for someone everyone assumed was invisible. An older receptionist looked up from her desk, watching the exchange with visible discomfort before lowering her eyes again. Across the hallway, Officer Ryan Cole hesitated for a brief second as though considering whether to step in, but he remained silent. Ethan interpreted that silence as approval. "You know," he continued with another grin, "some people are just born to clean up after everyone else." More scattered laughter followed, though this time it sounded weaker, less certain. Marcus finished wiping the floor, straightened the caution sign, and gently placed the bucket back onto his cart. Then he looked at Ethan, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with calm eyes that seemed to study him more than fear him. "Have a good morning, officer," Marcus said politely before pushing the cart toward the administrative hallway. Ethan laughed and shook his head. "Now that's dedication," he called after him. What Ethan never noticed was that several longtime employees quietly watched Marcus disappear through a secured doorway that most maintenance workers were never permitted to use. None of them said a word. None of them corrected the assumptions filling the room. They simply exchanged knowing glances before returning to their work, while the man everyone dismissed as nothing more than a janitor continued walking through the building as though he already knew exactly where he belonged. Marcus Ellison pushed his cart deeper into the administrative wing, where the sounds of ringing telephones gradually faded into a quieter rhythm of turning pages, muted conversations, and distant footsteps. Unlike the busy front lobby, this part of the building felt almost untouched by the rush of the morning. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long beams across framed photographs that celebrated decades of service. Marcus slowed his pace for only a moment, his eyes lingering on each picture with quiet familiarity before continuing down the hallway. Every few minutes another employee crossed his path. A records clerk smiled warmly and gave him a respectful nod. Marcus returned the greeting with the same gentle expression he had offered everyone else. An elderly maintenance technician carrying a toolbox paused beside him. "Good to see you back," the man said softly. Marcus smiled. "It is good to be back." The conversation lasted only a few seconds before both men continued on their separate paths, unnoticed by everyone else. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks leaned against the front reception desk, replaying the morning in front of several officers who laughed a little louder than the joke deserved. "You should have seen the look on his face," Ethan said confidently. "Some people act like cleaning floors is a mission from above." Ryan Cole forced another smile, but something about the exchange continued to bother him. "He did not really react," Ryan observed. Ethan shrugged. "Because he knows his place." Those words hung in the air longer than Ethan realized. Across the building, Marcus quietly replaced a burned-out light bulb in a conference room before carefully straightening a row of chairs around a polished wooden table. Everything he touched reflected patience instead of urgency. He never wasted movement. He never appeared distracted. It was almost as though he was studying the building as much as maintaining it. As he exited the room, a woman wearing an identification badge from the mayor's office stepped off the elevator. She immediately recognized Marcus and offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison." Marcus nodded graciously. "Good morning. I hope your trip was pleasant." "Very much so," she replied before continuing toward the executive offices. The brief exchange went unnoticed by everyone except a young administrative assistant, who looked puzzled but quickly returned to organizing paperwork. Downstairs, Ethan was finishing his second cup of coffee when Captain Laura Bennett walked through the lobby. She glanced around the room with unusual attention before asking the receptionist, "Has everyone arrived?" The receptionist answered with a quiet smile. "Almost everyone." Ethan assumed she was talking about the command staff meeting scheduled later that morning. "Big day?" he asked. Captain Bennett simply replied, "You could say that," before continuing toward the secured hallway Marcus had entered earlier. Ethan barely noticed. He was far more interested in entertaining the officers gathered around him than wondering why a maintenance worker seemed comfortable in areas reserved for senior personnel. Not long afterward, Marcus returned with his cart and carefully polished the brass nameplates mounted beside several office doors. His reflection shimmered faintly across the metal surface as he worked with steady hands. One detective passing through the hallway slowed down just enough to quietly say, "Everything is ready." Marcus looked up with a calm smile and answered, "Thank you." No explanation followed. No introduction was offered. The detective simply walked away as though the conversation required nothing more. From a distance, Ethan watched Marcus disappear once again beyond another secured doorway. He laughed under his breath and shook his head. That janitor sure acts like he owns the place. None of the people standing nearby answered him this time. Instead, an unusual silence settled over the station, almost as though the building itself was waiting for something that only a handful of people already knew was about to change everything. The station settled into the late morning rhythm as patrol units rotated in and out of the parking lot, telephones rang behind glass office doors, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the briefing area once again. Yet beneath the ordinary routine, an invisible current of anticipation continued to grow. More unfamiliar vehicles had quietly arrived outside, including several black sedans parked near the administrative entrance. Most officers assumed they belonged to city officials preparing for an important announcement. Ethan Brooks barely noticed them. His attention remained fixed on Marcus Ellison, who calmly wheeled his maintenance cart into the employee break room. Ethan exchanged a grin with two officers standing nearby before calling across the room, "Perfect timing. Since you are already here, these tables could use another wipe down." Marcus looked around the spotless room before answering with the same composed tone he had used all morning. "Of course, officer." He reached for a clean cloth and carefully polished the tabletop without the slightest sign of resentment. Ethan leaned back against the counter with folded arms. "You know, you are probably the quietest man in this building. Maybe that is why cleaning suits you so well." A few nervous laughs followed, though noticeably fewer than before. Officer Ryan Cole looked away and pretended to read a notice posted on the bulletin board. Even he could sense the atmosphere beginning to shift. Marcus finished cleaning the table and placed the cloth neatly back into his cart. "Anything else that needs attention?" he asked politely. Ethan smirked. "Actually, yes. My patrol vehicle has fingerprints all over the driver's side window. Since you seem to enjoy making things shine, maybe you can handle that too." Marcus simply nodded. "If maintaining the station helps everyone do their job better, I am happy to help." His answer caught several employees by surprise. There was no sarcasm. No bitterness. Only quiet professionalism. As Marcus walked toward the parking lot, Ethan shook his head with a laugh. I have never met anyone so comfortable taking orders. Outside, the summer air carried a gentle breeze across the department parking area. Marcus carefully cleaned the patrol vehicle exactly as requested, paying equal attention to every window, every mirror, and every door handle. While he worked, an elderly crossing guard walking past the station paused, smiled warmly, and tipped his cap toward Marcus. Marcus returned the greeting with genuine kindness before continuing his work. A moment later, Captain Laura Bennett stepped outside with a folder tucked beneath her arm. She noticed Marcus finishing the final window and slowed her pace. Everything is almost ready, she said quietly. Marcus gave a slight nod. That is good to hear. Ethan happened to glance through the front lobby windows just in time to see the brief exchange. He frowned for a second before dismissing it. She probably knows him from maintenance contracts, he muttered to Ryan. Ryan did not answer. Instead, he continued watching as Captain Bennett walked away with an expression that looked far more respectful than casual. Minutes later, Marcus returned the cleaning supplies to his cart and headed back inside. As he passed the reception desk, the dispatcher received a telephone call and immediately stood straighter. Yes, Mayor Foster, she said. Everyone is here. We are ready whenever you arrive. The words echoed softly across the lobby. Conversations slowed. Officers adjusted their uniforms. Detectives gathered their folders. Ethan smiled confidently, convinced the ceremony would simply introduce another administrator from City Hall. Across the polished floor, Marcus quietly parked his maintenance cart beside the wall, smoothed the sleeves of his work shirt, and looked toward the auditorium doors with the calm patience of a man who had never doubted where this day would lead. The double doors leading into the department auditorium remained closed as employees slowly gathered outside, forming small groups filled with quiet conversation and curious speculation. Uniformed officers adjusted their collars while civilian staff checked attendance lists and arranged rows of neatly folded programs on a table near the entrance. The atmosphere carried the unmistakable feeling that something important was about to happen, yet very few people seemed to know exactly what that something was. Marcus Ellison stood a short distance away beside his maintenance cart, calmly collecting a pair of disposable gloves and placing them inside a storage compartment before locking it. His movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, as though he believed every task deserved to be completed before the next one began. Ethan Brooks noticed him immediately and walked over with the same confident smile he had worn all morning. Looks like even the cleaning crew gets invited to special events now, he said loudly enough for nearby officers to hear. Several glanced toward Marcus before looking away, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus simply smiled politely. Everyone has responsibilities today, officer. Ethan laughed. That might be the most serious answer anyone has ever given about pushing a mop. A few forced chuckles echoed through the hallway, but they faded almost as quickly as they began. Ryan Cole shifted uneasily beside Ethan. Maybe we should head inside, he suggested quietly. Ethan ignored him. Instead, he pointed toward a stack of folded chairs resting against the wall. Before the ceremony starts, those chairs should probably be lined up. Since you are already here, you can take care of that. Without hesitation, Marcus walked toward the chairs and began arranging them in perfect rows with careful precision. There was no sign of annoyance, no complaint, only the quiet discipline that had defined every moment of his day. As he finished placing the last chair, a city employee wearing an official identification badge approached from the elevator carrying a leather portfolio. The employee slowed for only a moment, offered Marcus a respectful nod and softly said, "Everything is prepared exactly as requested." Marcus answered with the slightest smile. "Thank you. I appreciate your work." Ethan caught only the final words of the exchange and smirked. Listen to that. He talks like he is supervising the whole building. The comment drew no laughter this time. Instead, Captain Laura Bennett emerged from the auditorium carrying a clipboard. She looked directly at Marcus for a brief moment before checking her watch. "We are right on schedule," she said. Marcus nodded once. "Excellent." She continued walking without another word. Ethan frowned. Something about the interaction felt unusual, Yet his confidence refused to let doubt take hold. "She is probably just being polite," he muttered. Beyond the glass entrance, more official vehicles rolled into the parking lot. Men and women in business attire stepped out, accompanied by members of the city administration. The receptionist hurried toward the front entrance while dispatchers quietly straightened their desks. Every detail suggested careful preparation rather than ordinary routine. Marcus looked through the front windows for a brief second before gently removing a small cleaning cloth from his pocket and wiping an almost invisible fingerprint from the polished brass handle of the auditorium door. Satisfied, he folded the cloth neatly and slipped it back into his pocket. Ethan watched the gesture with amusement. "You really do not miss a single detail, do you?" Marcus met his eyes with the same calm expression that had never once changed throughout the morning. "Some details seem small until the moment they matter most." Before Ethan could respond, the auditorium doors slowly opened, and an administrative assistant announced that everyone should take their seats because the ceremony was about to begin. One by one, officers, detectives, civilian employees, and city officials filed inside, unaware that the assumptions many of them had carried all morning were only moments away from being tested. The auditorium slowly filled with the quiet murmur of conversation as nearly every chair became occupied. Patrol officers sat beside detectives, civilian employees found seats along the back rows, and representatives from City Hall gathered near the front. A large department emblem hung behind the stage beneath the American flag, while a simple wooden podium waited beneath the bright overhead lights. Everyone sensed that the morning would bring an important announcement, but only a handful of people knew just how significant it would become. Ethan Brooks settled comfortably into a seat near the center aisle, crossing one leg over the other with complete confidence. Ryan Cole sat beside him, though his attention kept drifting toward the entrance instead of the stage. "Who do you think they picked?" Ryan whispered. Ethan shrugged with a grin. "Probably another administrator who will spend more time in meetings than on the street." Several officers nearby quietly laughed. Then Ethan noticed Marcus Ellison standing near the rear doors with his maintenance cart. "Look at that," Ethan muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "Even the janitor wants a front row view." A few heads turned toward Marcus before quickly looking away. Marcus remained exactly where he was, calm and composed, his hands resting lightly on the handle of the cart. There was no embarrassment in his face, no frustration, only quiet patience. Ethan shook his head with a smile. He must think this ceremony is for him. This time no one laughed. The silence felt different now. Ryan shifted in his chair and lowered his voice. "Maybe just let it go." Ethan dismissed the suggestion with a wave of his hand. "Relax. I am only joking." At that moment, Captain Laura Bennett stepped onto the stage carrying a folder. The room gradually fell silent as she welcomed everyone and thanked them for their years of service to the city. She spoke about leadership, integrity, and the responsibility every employee carried, regardless of title or assignment. Ethan listened with only half his attention, occasionally glancing toward Marcus, who still stood quietly near the entrance. Then Captain Bennett paused and looked toward the front row, where several city officials had just taken their seats. A moment later, Mayor Daniel Foster entered the auditorium. Every officer immediately rose to their feet. The mayor greeted several people before taking his place at the podium. His calm voice filled the room. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this department. The selection process has been thorough, and we search for someone whose character reflects not only professional excellence, but also humility, fairness, and respect for every member of this community." Ethan folded his arms with quiet confidence. "Sounds like another speech," he whispered. Ryan did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the stage. The mayor continued describing the department's future, emphasizing that true leadership could never be measured only by rank, uniform, or authority. Instead, he spoke about listening before judging, serving before leading, and treating every person with dignity regardless of occupation or appearance. As those words echoed through the auditorium, several longtime employees exchanged subtle glances with one another. Marcus remained perfectly still near the entrance, listening without the slightest change in expression. Captain Bennett checked her watch once more before giving the mayor a nearly imperceptible nod. The mayor smiled warmly and closed the folder in front of him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice becoming even more deliberate, "it is my privilege to introduce the individual who will lead the Westbrook Police Department into its next chapter. Before I ask him to join me on this stage, I would like everyone to take a careful look around this room. Sometimes the greatest test of character happens long before anyone realizes they are being observed." A deep silence settled over the auditorium. Ethan frowned slightly for the first time that morning, suddenly uncertain why those words seemed directed at everyone in the room, including himself. Mayor Daniel Foster stepped away from the podium and allowed the silence to settle across the auditorium. No one moved. Even the faint sound of the air conditioning seemed to disappear beneath the weight of anticipation. The mayor slowly scanned the room before smiling toward the back of the auditorium. "Would Chief Marcus Ellison please join me on the stage?" For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Ethan Brooks remained comfortably seated with an amused expression, assuming another distinguished guest would soon enter through the side doors. Instead, every pair of eyes gradually turned toward the rear entrance where Marcus Ellison quietly stood beside the maintenance cart. Marcus looked down for a brief moment, carefully removed the pair of work gloves from his hands, folded them with deliberate care, and placed them neatly on top of the cart. He straightened the sleeves of his simple work shirt, then began walking toward the stage with the same calm pace he had carried throughout the entire morning. One step after another, the room grew quieter. Captain Laura Bennett smiled with unmistakable respect. The representatives from City Hall rose to their feet. Several senior detectives followed immediately. Within seconds, the entire front section of the auditorium stood in applause. Ryan Cole slowly rose as well, his eyes widening with disbelief. Ethan remained frozen in his chair, staring at Marcus as though his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. The man he had dismissed all morning walked confidently across the room, not with arrogance but with quiet dignity that suddenly explained every strange detail everyone else had noticed. The respectful greetings, the secured hallways, the conversations with city officials, the confidence that had never once faded. Marcus reached the stage and shook the mayor's hand warmly before exchanging a respectful nod with Captain Bennett. The mayor turned back toward the audience. After a nationwide search and months of careful evaluation, the city council unanimously selected Chief Marcus Ellison to lead this department. His career has been defined by integrity, service, accountability, and an unwavering belief that every person deserves respect regardless of position or appearance. A wave of applause filled the room once again. Ethan felt every word echo louder than the applause itself. Memories from the morning replayed inside his mind with painful clarity. The spilled bucket, the sarcastic remarks, the requests to clean tables and patrol vehicles, the jokes made in front of fellow officers. Marcus had answered every one of them with patience instead of resentment. The mayor continued speaking. Chief Ellison requested something unusual for his first day. He asked not to arrive wearing a dress uniform or standing behind a title. He wanted to walk through this building as an ordinary employee, because he believes the true character of an organization reveals itself in the way people treat those they believe cannot offer them anything in return. A quiet murmur spread throughout the auditorium. Ryan slowly turned toward Ethan, but neither man spoke. There was nothing left to say. Every unexplained moment from the morning now fit together with perfect clarity. Marcus stepped to the podium, resting his hands gently along its sides. He looked across the audience with calm eyes that carried neither anger nor triumph. His gaze briefly settled on Ethan before moving across the rest of the room. There was no satisfaction in exposing anyone, only quiet resolve. The applause gradually faded until complete silence returned. Every officer, every civilian employee, and every city official waited to hear the first words from the man many of them had failed to truly see only a few hours earlier. Marcus Ellison allowed the silence to linger for a few seconds before speaking. His voice was calm, steady, and carried effortlessly through the auditorium without ever becoming harsh. "Thank you for your welcome," he began. "This morning I walked through this building wearing the same clothes many people have already forgotten. I pushed a maintenance cart. I polished windows. I cleaned tables. I greeted everyone exactly the same way because I wanted my first lesson as your chief to begin before anyone knew my title. Not a single chair moved. Every eye remained fixed on the stage." Marcus continued with the same measured tone. Leadership is not tested when everyone recognizes your rank. Leadership is tested when no one believes you have any authority at all. Several officers quietly lowered their heads. Ryan Cole felt a knot form in his stomach as he replayed the morning, remembering every opportunity he had ignored. Marcus looked across the audience with genuine warmth instead of disappointment. Many people treated me with kindness today. Some offered a smile. Some offered respect. Some simply treated me like another human being. Those moments mattered more than they probably realized. He paused briefly before adding, "Others made different choices." Ethan Brooks remained perfectly still. His heartbeat seemed louder than the applause that had filled the room only moments earlier. Marcus never mentioned him by name. He did not point toward any seat. He did not embarrass anyone publicly. Instead, he continued speaking to the entire department. The badge on your chest introduces your profession. It does not define your character. Character is revealed by how you speak to someone who cannot improve your career, someone who cannot promote you, someone you believe the world will never notice. The words settled heavily over the audience. Mayor Daniel Foster watched quietly from the side of the stage while Captain Laura Bennett folded her hands with quiet approval. Marcus opened a small folder resting on the podium. "Before accepting this position, I asked the City Council for permission to spend my first morning here observing daily interactions. Without announcing who I was, I wanted to understand the culture I had been asked to lead." A quiet wave of surprise moved through the room. Marcus closed the folder again. Today was never about catching people. It was about understanding people. Every organization reflects the habits its members repeat when they think no one important is watching. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes toward the floor. For the first time in many years, he realized that every careless joke, every dismissive comment, and every assumption he had made had been witnessed by the one person whose opinion would matter most. Marcus rested both hands lightly on the podium once again. "I did not come here to punish anyone for a single mistake. I came here to build a department where respect becomes our first instinct instead of our last realization. Accountability is necessary, but growth is even more important. Every one of us, including me, will be measured by the same standard. We will treat every resident, every visitor, every coworker, and every employee with equal dignity because the community deserves nothing less." A gentle round of applause began near the front of the auditorium before gradually spreading through every row. Even those who felt uncomfortable found themselves standing. Ethan remained seated for one more moment, staring quietly at the stage before finally rising with everyone else. As the applause filled the room, Marcus acknowledged it with a simple nod, but his eyes briefly rested on Ethan once more. There was no anger in them, no triumph, only the calm expectation that true leadership now required every person in that room to decide what kind of officer they wanted to become after this day. The applause slowly faded, and people began leaving the auditorium in thoughtful silence. Conversations that had been filled with confidence only an hour earlier were now replaced by quiet reflection. Officers walked through the hallways more slowly than usual, greeting receptionists, custodians, and administrative staff with a level of courtesy that had often been overlooked before. The atmosphere inside the Westbrook Police Department had shifted in a single morning, but Marcus Ellison knew that lasting change could never depend on one speech alone. It had to be supported by consistent action. Later that afternoon, Marcus met privately with Captain Laura Bennett and several members of the command staff. A series of personnel reviews had already been scheduled before his arrival, and he made one request that surprised everyone around the conference table. "Do not bring me only awards and commendations," he said calmly. "Bring me patterns. Show me how our people consistently treat one another in the public. Character is never measured by one exceptional day. It is measured by repeated choices." Captain Bennett nodded. "We have already started reviewing employee evaluations, citizen feedback, and internal mentoring reports." Marcus thanked her and reminded everyone that the purpose of accountability was improvement, not humiliation. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks remained alone in the nearly empty locker room. The polished confidence that had defined his morning had disappeared. Every sarcastic remark replayed inside his mind with uncomfortable clarity. For the first time in his career, he realized that the greatest damage had not come from a formal complaint or disciplinary meeting. It had come from seeing himself through someone else's quiet patience. Ryan Cole eventually entered the room and sat beside him. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally Ryan broke the silence. "I should have said something." Ethan slowly nodded. "I should never have given you the chance to need to." Across the department, Marcus quietly visited every division without an escort. He thanked dispatchers for their work during difficult overnight shifts. He shook hands with records clerks whose names many officers barely knew. He stopped to speak with maintenance employees and cafeteria workers, asking how long they had served the department and whether they had the resources they needed. News of those conversations spread quickly through the building. Employees noticed that the new chief asked the same thoughtful questions whether he was speaking with a senior detective or someone emptying recycling bins. By the end of the day, Captain Bennett completed the first review of recent personnel records and quietly placed a folder on Marcus's desk. The file contained documented concerns about communication, professionalism, and repeated complaints involving Officer Ethan Brooks. None of the reports described major misconduct, but together they revealed a pattern of disrespect that had been addressed informally several times without lasting improvement. Marcus closed the folder after reading every page. "We will follow department policy," he said evenly. "Every employee deserves fairness, including Officer Brooks. We will evaluate facts, expectations, and opportunities for growth exactly the same way we would for anyone else." There was no anger in his voice, only consistency. The next morning, word quietly spread that additional leadership coaching, performance reviews, and workplace conduct standards would be implemented across the entire department rather than directed at a single individual. Nobody was singled out in public. Nobody became an example for humiliation. Instead, the standard itself became higher for everyone. Ethan understood what that meant the moment he received notice of his scheduled professional review. The consequence was not sudden or dramatic. It was something much more difficult to ignore. For the first time, he would have to confront the habits he had defended for years, knowing that the department he served would now be led by someone who believed respect was not an optional quality, but the foundation of every badge worn inside those walls. Several weeks passed, and the Westbrook Police Department no longer felt like the building Marcus Ellison had quietly entered with a maintenance cart on his first morning. The changes were not dramatic or loud. They appeared in ordinary moments that most people would have overlooked before. Officers greeted receptionists by name instead of walking past them. Detectives thanked evidence technicians after long investigations. Supervisors regularly checked on civilian employees whose work had once gone unnoticed. Respect had slowly become part of the daily routine rather than a speech remembered from a ceremony. Marcus never reminded people about that first day. He never mentioned the bucket of water, the sarcastic remarks, or the uncomfortable silence that had filled the auditorium after his identity was revealed. He believed that real leadership did not keep old mistakes alive. It created opportunities for better decisions tomorrow. Ethan Brooks experienced those opportunities more personally than anyone else. His performance review had been thorough, fair, and consistent with department policy. He completed additional leadership training, participated in professional coaching sessions, and accepted mentoring assignments designed to strengthen communication, accountability, and public service. The process was not easy because it required something no uniform could provide: honest self-reflection. One quiet afternoon, Ethan noticed an elderly maintenance employee struggling to move several heavy storage boxes toward the records room. Weeks earlier, he probably would have walked past without thinking twice. Instead, he immediately crossed the hallway and smiled. "Let me help you with those." The employee looked surprised before gratefully accepting the offer. As they finished stacking the boxes, Ethan quietly said, "Thank you for everything you do around here." The words were simple, but they were genuine. Ryan Cole happened to witness the exchange and smiled to himself without saying a word. Later that day, Ethan knocked on the open door of the chief's office. Marcus looked up from a report and invited him inside. For several seconds neither man spoke. Finally Ethan took a slow breath. "Chief, I owe you an apology. Not because you became chief, but because I forgot that every person deserves respect before I know anything about their title." Marcus listened quietly before offering a small nod. "That lesson will serve you far longer than any promotion ever could." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I cannot change what I did."
No, Marcus replied.